Moving on to COVID and the impact of that on business and, of course, the testing regimes. There is an urgent need, obviously, for safe, fast and reliable vaccinations and testings, particularly in the hardest hit sectors if we're focusing here on business. So, as you've said, events, but also the travel industry, transport and other areas. I know you've repeatedly raised concerns on this about that actually we could have done better on our testing performance. But what do you think currently, looking now at it, what do you think?
So I think the government took a while to get to grips with testing, and I don't know if it was their own decision or if they were poorly advised, but back at the beginning of the pandemic they were not doing testing as much as they should have done. Now they got their act together later in the year. I think after September, certainly throughout the autumn, we've seen a massive upswing in testing, and that's made a real difference. They're not done so great on the tracing and the isolating, which I think could have made a difference. But even just testing has made a difference because it's enabled things to happen that couldn't happen without it. And I just think, particularly now with the news we're hearing about potentially a new strain, we have got to ramp up that testing even more. The testing has to be available because the trouble is at the moment the testing is all about people when they're showing symptoms. And we know with this new strain that we're seeing, it's the asymptomatic spread that is the most dangerous. So we need to see a massive upscaling again in testing so that people can be tested regularly, and so that we know when people can't wait until they're showing symptoms because they may be infectious without showing symptoms. So that's got to be the key to getting us through to the spring and the summer when, with a bit of luck, we can, have everybody vaccinated. So testing has got to be absolutely central. And you're so right. I mean, I was speaking to Reed Exhibitions, for example, who's had a big office in Richmond and is now closed. And that's what they were calling for. And obviously the exhibition sector is very much the intersection of live events and the travel sector, which have been so poorly hit. And more testing could have made such a big difference, particularly over the autumn, to those sectors, and are absolutely key to getting them back up and running again. And we really, really want to see a healthy live event sector by the summer, and testing is absolutely critical to that.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Now, it's another unpalatable subject, I'm afraid. Brexit and the need for a deal, whether you're for or against. I'm speaking about our viewers. Clearly, from a business perspective, we need to know where we are, what's happening. So certainty is urgently required, and particularly in respect to mandatory business protocols such as you know, Sarah, tax, finance, contracts, other legal matters such as GDPR, export documentation, and so on. The list goes on. This is simply so they can budget and plan. We're here in Richmond. We're predominantly a Remain constituency, but there are others who voted for Brexit. We are non-partisan, and we are linked to the London Chamber of Commerce. I'm now the deputy lead chair for the local London Chambers of Commerce. But whether you're for or against, you need a hand of cards to play with, and at the moment we just don't have that. And we're still waiting to hear. So again, we would be extremely grateful to hear your perspective on this, on Brexit and where it's going.
Absolutely, and I totally respect what you're saying about needing to take a kind of a neutral view. And I think, to be honest with you, the Remain-Leave divide is pretty much something that's kind of almost now in the past. The Conservatives won a majority this time last year, and they won a mandate to implement Brexit. And that is what they promised the country they would do, and the least the country could expect from then on in is that they would pursue the Brexit that best protected the interests of the United Kingdom. So it's not really any longer about whether you think Brexit should happen or not happen. Yeah. What matters now is what kind of deal are the government going to negotiate? Exactly. How easy are they going to make it for British companies to continue to trade in the EU once we've left? Or once the transition period has expired, I should say. But here we are in the second half of December, and we don't have a deal.
No.
And it's kind of, it really doesn't matter what sort of deal you're after, or whether you really think no deal is the right outcome. We have less than 14 days from now an entirely new trading environment, a trading relationship with our Our nearest geographical trading partner is a really, really important trading partner, and we don't know what that looks like.
Yes.
So what the Liberal Democrats were calling for all the way back in the spring was to say, well, actually, politics aside, you really must extend that transition period, because you cannot negotiate this absolutely critical trade deal and deal with a pandemic at the same time. And the government rejected that option. So they've laid that timescale on themselves. And what we're calling for now is either an emergency extension to the transition, because clearly the coronavirus is very, very much still a present and unfolding crisis. So we cannot conclude this trade deal in the next 2 weeks, the way the government seems to have thought that we might. But if not that, then at least a period whereby British businesses can sort themselves out. Because leaving it till this very, very, very late stage, all those things you just said then, people are talking about the customs paperwork, but you touched on that vast array of other areas. It's about VAT, it's about GDPR, it's about immigration, all of those things. And so, and it doesn't necessarily matter if you're exporting goods to the EU, you will still be impacted by some of those areas. So a vast degree of our processes around British business is going to be impacted, and because we haven't even got to the stage of triggering the processes whereby we figure out how all of those things are going to work, and we are less than 2 weeks from the end of the transition period, and we are in the biggest domestic crisis that I can remember in my lifetime.
Agreed.
It's just madness. So the government need to give British businesses more time. And, with more time, businesses can then deal with whatever deal or no deal the British government decides in its wisdom is the best, outcome that it personally is seeking. But whatever that looks like, British businesses need more time, and the government must give them more time to prepare.
And businesses are flexible. They are flexible. They're able to adapt. But they need to know what to. So,
I absolutely agree with that. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to say it's been extraordinary. I've been going around small businesses in the constituency since the pandemic, first started. And there's no doubt they've had an absolutely turbulent time, particularly our retailers who've been shut, then open, then shut, then open, and, all sorts of things. But it's extraordinary how people have adapted, click and collect, and really developing their online services or diversifying into goods they didn't previously provide, providing services, switching to completely different areas, and not elsewhere in the country, manufacturers have switched from whatever it was they were doing to making ventilators or producing PPE. It really has been extraordinary, and I think it says, in a curious kind of way, it's been a great year for British business to show what it's capable of, and I'm really, really supportive of that, particularly our local traders here. And I do think that, it also goes to show how important government guidelines and certainty, and the government has to understand the role that it plays in facilitating business, and without that it makes everything incredibly difficult.
As you know, it takes businesses usually up to a year to budget for the following year, so how can they budget with days to go?
And I'm thinking back to, just this time, just over a year ago, I was working as an accountant for historic royal palaces at Hampton Court. And we were preparing for Making Tax Digital, which some of your viewers will know exactly what I'm talking about. That took so much planning, and that took so much time and effort to really think about whether we, and I'm happy to say it all went very smoothly and implemented well. But that I know from my own personal experience how much time and effort is required to really go through all your processes and make sure you're doing the right thing. And I can't begin to imagine, Making Tax Digital was relatively small compared to the huge changes that some businesses are going to have to be made.
People who are not active in business don't always appreciate how much work goes on in the background in businesses to plan and prepare.
And I think the other thing that's really important to say is the vast majority of businesses want to be compliant. They understand what the rules are and why they're there, and they really want to abide by them. But if they haven't got any rules, what are they supposed to do?
Absolutely.